Let's begin with a little meditation motivation. Sit comfortably. Relax your body. Get your feet in position. Relax your mind. Make sure your body, your spine is straight. Let go of any anticipations or worries. Just focus on your respiration. Bringing your attention inside to your mental consciousness, thinking of a turtle or tortoise withdrawing its limbs away into the shell, its head. Like that, imagine taking your attention away from the sense consciousnesses. When we say sense consciousness, that means the five senses, not the mental, the sixth sense. And then let go of your attention to the breathing, looking at the clear light nature of the mind. If you have a memory of that, remembering consciousness, as we'll see in the Prasangika, that memory consciousness is even called a direct perceiver, although it's still conceptual. Whatever thoughts your mind may wander to, take your attention away from them, deprive them of their longevity. Just sense the clear light nature of the mind, its lack of obstruction to thoughts emerging or disappearing, dissolving back into it. Although this is the conventional nature of the mind, this clear light nature, conventional clear light nature, it is said to be a very special basis to meditate on the ultimate nature of the mind, the emptiness of the mind. Seeing, recognizing this potential to develop positive states of mind within our consciousness, that we have no hindrance to developing them. It's just our ordinary disturbed minds that see some lack of ability or low self-esteem. Seeing also that the faults can be removed, that we are not our anger or attachment or other kinds of conceptions of ourself of being inferior or having fault. They can all be removed from the mind. And recognizing that the ability to recognize that right now, seeing that, is due to having a life of leisure and endowment. How wonderful it would be if we could acquire such a life again in succession to continue on the path in the future, which depends upon creating virtue, the causes of a life of leisure and endowment, and removing the strong, heavy karmas within our mind through purification. So thinking that in order to further that end, to have a continuity of lives, to continue practicing, to achieve realizations of renunciation, bodhicitta, and the wisdom that realizes emptiness, I'm going to participate in the Tenets class today, centering on the Prasangika school of tenets, renowned as the pinnacle of the Buddha's view on emptiness. So that we can get closer to achieving the state of being a bodhisattva, having bodhicitta, realizing emptiness and so forth, to eventually become a Buddha, from which state we can rest without worry about ourself and work solely for the welfare of others, spontaneously and effortlessly. Just as we would like to be free of all suffering and have all happiness, we can enact that for all living beings. I'm going to participate this morning in order to achieve enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings. And then bringing your attention back to the present. You can visualize in front of you. Usually there are 3 spots where one visualizes deities. If it's not yourself, if you don't self-identify as a deity, not self-generation, but front generation, about 1 body length in front of you, the level of your brow, can be as small as possible, even the smaller the better. Like red, yellow, manjushri, orange manjushri. Or at the crown of your head, one of the other important places, sitting there as your witness, witnessing your virtuous and non-virtuous actions. And at your heart chakra, 3rd place, you can visualize the deity. So visualizing Manjushri, let us make this praise and prayer to Manjushri. Homage to my guru and protector, Venerable Manjushri, who holds at his heart a scripture symbolic of seeing all as it is, whose pure genius shines like the sun unclouded by the 2 obscurations, who with compassion like a father for his only child, teaches with 60-fold eloquence all beings imprisoned in cyclic existence who are groping in the darkness of ignorance and overwhelmed by suffering. You, Manjushri, whose thunder-like proclamation of the Prajnaparamita arouses us from the stupor of our afflictions and frees us from the iron chains of karma, who wields wisdom's sword, vanquishing the darkness of ignorance, hewing down our every sprout of suffering. You who are primordially pure, with finished the 10 grounds, the complete embodiment of every excellence, whose princely body is graced with 112 adornments. O Manjushri, to you I bow. Please dispel the darkness of my mind. And then reciting the mantra 21 times, O Mata Patsanandi, we'll then say 108 times the seed syllable D. You can imagine the D on the tip of your tongue, surrounded by the, on a sun disk, surrounded by the syllables of the mantra. Om Barabazanari, 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 Om Barabazanari. Oh, swallow saliva. Imagine the D comes down to your heart chakra and absorbs into your subtlemost mind. And then relax again. How's everyone feeling? Okay, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. 12 intrepid members. So, okay, those thumbs up, I guess that meant everyone was okay. As just before we entered, Stephen and I were chatting, and he said he noticed that also in the basic program courses that the number diminishes over time, but so I can, yes, Bob.
As we were talking before class, I think it's worth bringing up this notion of next week. I did look on the TNL, Tipton Norville Lane schedule, and our class is on the calendar for next week. So I'm sure that continuing the class to next week will be fine. I checked for June, and there was nothing on either Friday or Saturday mornings for June for a possible follow-up class on minds and mental factors or whatever it was. So I will go ahead and check with Chonka after the class about the next class. But I think we're fine for next week if you want to continue for next week.
Okay, so that's kind of the plan. We can do a quick brush through Prasangika today, but if we have the luxury of one more class, we can go into some of the details of the Prasangika, which is considered to be the pinnacle of the Buddhist philosophical views, especially by Tibetan Lamas. And, as we mentioned, Zen has some interest in Chittamatra, Yogacara, but also a great tradition of practicing Zazen and meditating on emptiness with a Prasangika view. And then in theory, we will continue with not much of a break, if any break at all, either on Fridays or Saturdays. And there may have been some little survey of which day you would like. So I'll wait to hear back from Shanka about that. Okay, so any questions, lingering questions from previous class? Anyone? No, okay. So we're going to continue. Last time, we were still talking about way of asserting object possessors. I may be going back a little bit from what we are on outline number 5 on page 26 of the Svensson translation. So the mere I that is imputed independence on the 5 aggregates is asserted to be an illustration of the person. So this is quite different than all of the other lower tenets. When I say lower, I was considering Prasangika to be the pinnacle. There's always something that can be pointed out as findable. And Prasangika would say that implies inherently existent, that can be pointed out as an illustration of the person. Whereas the Prasangika says that let's say the person is the mere I, the merely labeled I, and that is labeled in dependence upon the 5 aggregates. It's some of the other traditions say the 5 aggregates themselves are the person or illustration of the person, or one of the aggregates is an illustration of the person, always implying from a Prasangika view, when I'm using my hand coming back toward me, that it's inherently existent out there. So the Prasangika says the mere I, just the merely labeled I. So when we are, so what is the mere I? The mere I is just the name or concept. We say both, name or concept. It depends on the situation that you're referring to the I. Say, for instance, a cow doesn't use names, but it still has a conception of itself. That conception of itself is not the mere I. That conception of the self is one in which the self is inherently existent. When you get down to the subtlemost misapprehension, when you've eliminated that misconception that the I is inherently existent, it's only at that point that an individual can have an appreciation of what it means to be merely imputed, it's said. Even though merely imputed I exists conventionally, it does exist. The I, you say the mere I, the conventional I, does exist conventionally. It doesn't exist ultimately, but it does exist conventionally. In what way does that I exist? Merely as a name labeled onto its constituent parts. Say in terms of the person, the constituent parts are the 5 aggregates, right? You could have different set of constituent parts. You could talk about the 5 elements, like in Nagarjuna's text, talking about the person is not fire, is not, in other words, not heat, is not cohesion, like the water element, is not wind, it's not earth, it's not solidity, it's not the consciousness. And other than that, what other person is there? Or you can sometimes add the 6th, the space element. So there could be different constituents that you think of the I being labeled onto, but that label itself, when we say name or thought, concept, is labeled by name or concept, that itself is not findable in ultimate analysis. That is, if you try to find where it is, what it is within the aggregates, the name is just what is designated to that collection of parts. That's the mere I. So that does exist for a Prasangika, and that is the illustration of the person. The mere I that is imputed independence on the 5 aggregates is asserted to be an illustration of the person. No other illustration. The person is necessarily a non-associated compositional factor. So what is a Jeremy, what is a non-associated compositional factor? Explain it to me like I was a 4-year-old.
Oh, I don't know if I can do it. A non-associated.
Okay, so what is a little easier? What is a compositional factor?
Well, compositional factor, would it be basically the an object that, or not so much?
Object, well, maybe. So in the 5, what are the 5 aggregates?
Yeah, just your senses, your touch, your taste, your smell, your sight, and
No.
oh, the 5 I'm sorry.
Yeah, the 5 aggregates, not the 5 senses.
Oh, yeah, the discrimination, compositional factors was one.
Compositional factor is one of them, right? So form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and primary consciousness. When I say primary, that means, bare consciousness, not the mental factors. So one of them is material, form. The other 4 are variations of divisions of consciousness. So we settled off feeling and discrimination, and then all the other mental factors are in the 4th aggregate, compositional factors aggregate. So, and then, and it includes other things besides that. It includes the person. The mere I is included here. The 5th aggregate is the primary consciousness, both mental and, eye primary consciousness, ear, nose, taste, all of those consciousness. The prime is in the 5th consciousness, the 5th aggregate. So these 3, feeling, discrimination, and compositional factors, include all the mental factors, and also non-associated compositional factors are in the compositional factors aggregate. What are non-associated compositional factors? Things which are impermanent, which are not associated with mind or form. Non-associated compositional factors. Well, compositional factors are not associated with form, but non-associated compositional factors are those things that are impermanent, which are not part of the person, which are not associated with consciousness. So what is that? The person. The person, the person has a body, the person has a mind, but the person themselves, Jeremy, is designated or imputed to the combination of both form and consciousness. So it's of a different category. It's not form, it's not consciousness, but it's still impermanent. The person is impermanent. So the person is said to be an instance of a non-associated compositional factor. That means it's a compositional factor, but it is not like some of the other compositional factors that are consciousness, like the mental factors. Okay, does it make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
So, anyone have a question about that? That's pretty clear, right? Tenzin Janju.
Yeah, so my question about this is, in all of the other schools, they don't use the concept of mirror. They use the concept of a person. And when the Prasangika school now, we seem to be talking about mere I instead of a person imputed on, right? The terminology has changed significantly, and I always remain confused about how is this now defined differently? Are the words different in Tibetan? The mere I, is the mere I related to the like in Tibetan, does the concept of person carry over into the mere I, or are they also using different words? I guess that's my question.
So in the lower schools, they may, in some instances, they may use the term mirror, and when they say the person is the a person is the mere I, but they mean it in a different way if they do use it. Yet generally they won't use the word mirror. They'll say a person is the being, in Tibetan kebu, or what's another word? Yeah, the being who is imputed upon the five aggregates. They don't say the mere person that is imputed on the five aggregates. The mere here refutes there being any kind of inherent existence. It's nothing more than that. Just the imputation upon the five aggregates. The other tenets, and probably for our minds too, that seems a little bit awkward, because you would expect there to be something which is the recipient of your imputation. As though, here it says it's imputed independence on the five aggregates. The lower schools understand that the five aggregates are somehow out there, inherently existent, not truly existent in the case of Svatantrika Madhyamaka, but still inherently existent, which are a suitable receptacle to give your imputation, upon which you can give it. So the mere I here implies that the I is not findable as an inherently existent phenomena. Does that help, Tenzin?
I think so. I think it's getting a little clearer for me because not only have they changed the definition, they've changed the concept of the referent object, which also becomes illustration of the person, right?
Well,
So
that's
they've
different.
changed
The
both.
illustration of the person and referent object are different. So,
But no,
when-
I mean, in terms of the mere eye, the mind cognizing a mere eye, the referent object becomes an illustration of a person, is what I'm saying.
yeah, that's the only illustration of a person. There is an illustration of a person, but the mere eye is not something that you can point to somewhere. You can't say if Bob is sitting and you say, where is Bob? He's in New Mexico, all this sort of thing in that room. That's Bob. But the mere eye is not something that you can find within the parts. In fact, you're not even pointing to the mere eye. The mere eye is something which is kind of inexpressible. I might have mentioned to you folks before when His Holiness was giving us a talk. I think we were at Tushita Meditation Center in India, and Jeffrey Hopkins happened to be in Dharamsala, so we enlisted him to translate. We had a question and answer session, and His Holiness said, the table is not the parts. The table is not different than the parts. You can't find, if you take away the parts of the table, you can't find the table. It's not like it's something that's existing there even without the parts. You can't find the table in any of the parts. The table is just merely imputed upon the parts, the legs, the surface, the color. You could say the color is some of the parts. And then so I asked, so if can't be found in the parts, can't be found different than the parts, what is the table? And His Holiness responded through Jeffrey. I didn't know much Tibetan at the time, not that I would be even able to understand him now, but he said that borders on the inexpressible. Like in the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the Vajrachetaka, the Vajracutter Sutra, when the Buddha says the person is just a name. Any bodhisattva who thinks I am a person is not coursing in the perfection of wisdom. So, the implication of that is that if you have some kind of pride of being that is not divine, I'm not talking about divine pride. If you have some kind of self-assurance that you are existing, I am a bodhisattva, that implies some sense of grasping at an inherently existent I. So once you have eliminated that there is an inherently existent I, and you arise from that meditation, having realized emptiness, it's at that point that you can begin to inquire, well, things still appear and they have a consistency. Karma ripens on me, on me. I do things. So what is that I? And you come to understand then that the I is just a concept that is labeled onto those appearances, which themselves do not inherently exist, but it is still conventionally functioning. The I, the mere I is what is said to migrate to future lives and so future rebirths and so forth. Bob.
Just as a point of terminology, I've often heard the mere I has often been called the conventional I. And so here we're talking about it as the illustration of the I. Are the two synonymous?
So the conventional person or the conventional I, if you're talking about yourself, because you don't use I to refer to someone else, but you use the word person to refer to someone else. The conventional person or the conventional I is conventionally existent. It is not ultimately existent. It is imputed upon a collection, the collection of the five aggregates. Here it says independence on the five aggregates. that is the mere I. And if you ask for an illustration of it, it is just the mere I, just that mere label I. There's no other I that can be found anywhere within the aggregates or other than, separate from, unrelated to the aggregates. When I say other than the aggregates, you might think, well, it sounds like the I being labeled is other than the aggregates, but here it means, if you say other than the aggregates, that means independent of the aggregates. It's not something which can be found independent of the aggregates, as though you could label I without the aggregates being there, but it can't be found within them. So it is the mere I is an illustration, is the illustration of the person or of the I. Whereas in the lower tenets, there is always a findable illustration within the aggregates, either the collection of the aggregates or the mental consciousness, or for the Chittamatra, the alaya of the jnana. All of them you can kind of find something to illustrate the I. Here, the only illustration of the I is the mere I, which is the conventionally existent I. So so for the lower tenets, when we talked about Prasangika and so forth, when you are, if you talk about the view that's grasping to a self, it's called the view of the transitory collection. Have you heard that expression before? Kevin, Jeremy, have you heard that? You have. If I ask you, you wouldn't be able to tell me what it is, though. You've heard it. Okay. So the view of the transitory collection refers to conceiving of your own self. It doesn't refer to the conceiving of the self of others. Still, that is an ignorance, but the particular ignorance that grasps to a self-identity is called a view of the transitory collection. Transitory collection, in one sense, means this collection of aggregates which themselves are impermanent. So for the lower tenets, the referent object, that is the thing that you're thinking about, are the 5 aggregates, and you conceive them to be a self-supporting, substantially existent person. So the referent object is the 5 aggregates, I think, for all of the tenets below Prasangika. Whereas for Prasangika, the referent object is the mere I. It's not the aggregates. The mere I that is imputed on the independence on the 5 aggregates, but it's just the mere I. That is what you were referring to. And the ignorance, the view of the transitory collection, is a view that grasps that mere I to be inherently existent, to be existing from its own side. So the lower tenets take the referent object as the aggregates. The referent object is not like, that means that that's what you're thinking about, that's what you're referring to. And it conceives those 5 aggregates to be, or one of them, let's say the alaya, vijnana, or whatever, to be self-supporting, substantially existent. Sort of the, for all of the schools below, when you talk about selflessness of persons, that's the object of negation, self-supporting, substantial existence for the subtle selflessness of persons. Whereas for Prasangika, the subtle selflessness of persons is that the person is devoid of being inherently existent. So what's the referent? You're not thinking about the 5 aggregates. You're thinking about the mere I, just what you imagine I, and you're conceiving that to be inherently existent. Okay? So the person is a non-associated compositional factor. So it doesn't mean that say the person is a non-associated compositional factor, but that doesn't mean because it's one of the 5 aggregates, compositional factors is one of the 5 aggregates, right? Doesn't mean that you're imputing the person on the person. It just means that the person is a non-associated. If you were to ask what the person is it impermanent? Yes. If it's impermanent, it has to be either consciousness, form, or compositional factor. It's not form, it's not consciousness. The non-associated compositional factor means something which is impermanent, which is not body, not form or mind. Okay, 2 types of awareness. Prasangika, like others, said there are valid cognizers and non-valid cognizers. You could say here it doesn't necessarily have the word in Sanskrit or Tibetan, it doesn't have the word cognizer in that. It just says pramana and not pramana, you know. So there are 2 types of valid cognizers. There's 2 types of pramana when you talk about subject minds. Direct valid cognizers and inferential valid cognizers. So in the lower schools, direct valid cognizers were like eye consciousness and ear consciousness, that the first instant of that realized something, saw the tree, saw the cat, or the say the yogic direct perception that realizes the selflessness of the person is a direct valid cognizer. It realizes the aggregates are devoid of being self-supporting, substantially existent, and indirectly, it's a direct valid cognizer, but it realizes the selflessness implicitly, remember? It doesn't realize the selflessness, which is a permanent phenomena. It doesn't realize that directly because, according to the lower tenets, because only impermanent things can appear and be cognized by a direct valid cognizer directly, okay? There are direct valid cognizers and inferential valid cognizers. So inferential valid cognizers are realizers, mental cognitions that arise in dependence on having used logic to infer something. That's where the inferential, you know, infer fire or infer the emptiness of inherent existence. And unlike the lower schools, which say it has to be the first instant of that, direct valid cognizers don't have to be the first instant. Any of the instants of a train of thought that realize an object or a train of consciousness, say if you're looking, it's not thought, any subsequent instant of that is also a direct valid cognizer. So inferential cognizer, a little bit different. Self-knowing direct perceivers are not accepted by the Prasangika. Remember, of all the schools, the only ones that don't accept self-cognition are the Vaibhashikas and the Prasangika, right? So we have similarities, kind of interesting, kind of from the very lowest to the very highest. They have also only the Vaibhashika and the Prasangika accept non-revelatory forms to be form. You know what non-revelatory, did we talk about non-revelatory form? I don't think so. Non-revelatory form is, to give example, when you take vow, you promise to the Buddha, you take a ceremony and you say, I will not kill, I will not steal, this and that. It is said that by the force of that, you create some kind of, you could say form, which prevents you violating that. In the same way that if water is flowing and you want to stop it, you have to put up a form, you know, a wall, a dam, and that can stop it from flowing. So to prevent the continuity of performing negative actions, you make a vow, which has a certain kind of similarity to form. So both the Vaibhashika and the Prasangika accept this kind of, say, taking a vow or making a very strong wish or, you know, promise, or like resolution. Even resolution, you know, I will not cheat, or I will do this. That creates some kind of form, which is not visible to the ordinary senses, is visible to someone that has psychic powers. They could tell if you had broken your vows. If you go before a great being, a meditator, a Lama, or whatever Zen master who has, you know, this deep insight, they could actually just perceive whether you've broken your vows, not necessarily by remembering your past activity, but just perceiving right now whether there is a revelatory, non-revelatory form. Revelatory in the sense that it is not revealed to the senses. Revelatory forms are things that you see. They reveal themselves to your senses. Non-revelatory forms are forms, but they are not revealed to your sense consciousnesses, only to your mental consciousness. So there's some parallels between Prasangika and Vaibhashika. So they don't accept or assert self-knowing, valid, direct perceivers. They don't accept. They don't accept them. The other schools say that they are necessary to explain how we have memory of perceiving something. Remember we talked about this before? Nadine, do you remember this?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So when we say we remember a tree that we saw. We say, oh, I saw that, you know, I know that tree. Or I've been here before, I've seen that before. You have a memory of something that is induced by the perception of that. But how can you assert that there was a perception of that? You have a memory of the object by the force of having experienced it before with your senses or whatever. How can you verify that you actually saw it when you say, oh, I remember seeing that? So all of the other schools, besides Vaibhashika and Prasangika, say that you need to have, and I don't know what the Vaibhashika reason, they have some other reason for not asserting it, not the Prasangika version, but they say that you have to have some kind of cognition which knows the knower, a self-knower. Remember when we talked about, in Tibetan is Rangrik, it is part of every consciousness, according to the lower tenets, has an element to it that is knowing the knower, inwardly directed. We said, in other words, there are different kinds of ways of explaining it. It is that knower that you knew, that you had experienced something, that verifies that you can remember later. That's the reason why you can remember later saying, I saw that, the actual process of seeing or hearing or tasting. For Prasangika, just the mere experience of the object is sufficient to infer the consciousness that perceives that. In Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charyavatara, a famous verse in that couple of verses that talk about the refutation of self-knowers, which are prominent in the Chittamatra especially. They said, just as a sword cannot cut itself, consciousness cannot know itself. So that doesn't mean that you can't have introspection. You can look at your own mind, but the mind which is doing the looking is not the same mind that you're looking at. You know, one instant of mind can look at a previous instant of mind, but you don't have that so-called self-cognizing awareness. In the same way that, you know, a sword, no matter how you cut it, you can't cut the blade that you're using. You can say, oh, you can twist the blade around and one part of the blade can cut another, but that's not one point of the blade cutting itself, right? One point of the blade can't cut itself. So they don't accept self-knowers, and a sense consciousness in the continuum of a sentient being is pervaded by, or necessarily being, a mistaken consciousness. So all of the lower tenets say sense consciousnesses, many sense consciousnesses are non-mistaken. They know their object in a non-mistaken way. What is Prasangika getting at here? Well, Chittamatra would have a different take on this, but they would have a similar kind of statement. Prasangika is saying that a sense consciousness is mistaken in the sense that what appears to it is an inherently existent object. All phenomena appear to ordinary beings when they're not in meditative equipoise on emptiness. Even qualify it further, when you're not on a direct realization of emptiness in meditative equipoise, everything appears to you as being existing from the side of the object, as though you could find Bob in his parts, or you could find Jeremy or Kevin, even though you can't see Kevin, and you say, what are his parts? You know, it's just blackness there, just the word Kevin. It is a, this is one of the, what we call the obstructions to omniscience, that phenomena appear to ordinary beings as inherently existent. It's due to having an imprint of that from beginningless time, not just the seed of that, but an imprint, a subtle imprint in the mind, that phenomena, whenever we perceive conventional phenomena, they appear to be, not because of some perception on our part, they appear to exist from their own side. So from a Prasangika point of view, that is mistaken appearance. So remember what mistaken means here. When you talk about a sense consciousness, is the lower tenets generally say a mistaken sense consciousness is one in which a firebrand that's twirled around looks like a circle of fire, or a snow mountain that's actually white appears to be blue or yellow, depending on some other factor. Those are called mistaken sense consciousnesses. Whereas Prasangika says all sense consciousnesses are mistaken because they appear to be inherently existent, but they are not inherently existent. Right? Do you remember what the Chittamatra take on that is? Why sense consciousnesses are mistaken? Bob, do you know?
Oh, yeah, it's because the sense consciousness, the thing appears to be an external object, but it really isn't an external object.
Right, so there's some similarity there. They're saying that although phenomena are devoid of being, subject and object are devoid of being separate, they come from the same seed, they appear that way, and that is a mistake. So they would say they are mistaken consciousnesses for that reason, but the Prasangika says it for a different reason here. Make sense? What happened to David? I thought he was here before. He disappeared. He's taking a break. Okay. Mental consciousnesses and yogic direct perceivers can either be mistaken or non-mistaken. Oh, there he is. Was he there all the time? Okay.
I was.
I didn't see you.
Saving my bandwidth.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. You can go back to your bandwidth saving mode there. So mental consciousnesses and yogic direct perceivers can either be mistaken or non-mistaken. So what does that mean? To be non-mistaken from the Prasangika point of view would mean that the phenomena do not appear to be inherently existent. That's non-mistaken. That's correct. So yogic direct perceiver, let's say, take that first. Yogic direct perceiver is a kind of mental consciousness, but it's based on a union of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight. You have to have that to be called a yogic direct perceiver. So when you realize subtle impermanence, say the subtle impermanence of sound, what is appearing to you is the subtle impermanence. We're talking about a direct realization of that, a yogic direct perceiver, because we're talking about direct perceiver, right? A yogic direct perceiver. Still, the impermanence of sound appears to be inherently existing. Right, Bob? The impermanence of sound appears to be inherently existing. So although it's a yogic direct perceiver, it is knowing something that is true. You've realized the object, but it's still called a mistaken, that example is a mistaken cognition because it appears to be inherently existent. Whereas a yogic direct perceiver perceiving the emptiness of phenomena, emptiness, or say the emptiness of the person, what is appearing to you is, we're talking direct perceiver here, right? Yogic direct perceiver. What is appearing to you is actually true. It is, what am I trying to say here? It is not a mistake. Remember when we talked about mistaken consciousness, if someone, your neighbor, the example I like, His Holiness gave this example in the Key to the Middle Way. I find it very, very funny. You know, your neighbor is smiling at you, but every day moving their fence further onto your territory. So it looks like their property is getting bigger, yours is getting smaller. But the way of appearing does not accord with their way of existing. They're actually deceiving you, but they're appearing to be sincere and friendly and everything like this. So when we talk about what is, when you realize emptiness directly, what is appearing to you is only emptiness, the mere vacuity of inherent existence, the mere lack of inherent existence. And that there is no appearance of that as being inherently existent. Right? Because what is appearing is non-inherent existence. And look at your eyes. You're either in, oh, I see, David has a stupa there. Karen, does that make sense to you? If you were to have a direct realization of emptiness, and it were to appear to you as inherently existent, would that be possible?
No, it would just be emptiness, right? Is that inherent?
No, it would
The
not.
person's not. The person's
would-
not, but the emptiness is, right?
Well, let's say before direct realization, you have a union of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight. Shine and Lakton, Shamathan Vipassana, different ways of saying. And you are realizing emptiness by means of a generic image. You don't yet have a direct realization of it, okay? You're realizing it having used logic, and you haven't yet realized it directly. That's generally how you have to progress. You can't have a direct realization of emptiness without having first inferred its existence through logic. So at that point, you are knowing emptiness. You have a realization of emptiness. It is a valid consciousness, but you are knowing it by means of a mental image. That mental image of emptiness can become more and more factually concordant as you have a better understanding of the meaning of emptiness. But that mental image, being a conventional phenomena, necessarily appears to be inherently existent. It appears to be inherently existent. All consciousnesses, all conceptual consciousnesses depend upon a mental image, right, to know the object. And that mental image necessarily appears to be inherently existent because it's a conventional phenomena. What is the ultimate phenomena? Well, let's say it's a conventional truth. It's a conventional phenomena. It's a conventional truth. What is the only ultimate truth? Emptiness. So the only thing that appears to be lacking inherent existence is emptiness itself. Here in the conceptual realization of it, hard to tell with your eyes whether you're following. When you have a conceptual realization of emptiness, you are knowing emptiness infallibly. You've realized it, but it's still deficient because it's a mistaken consciousness, because the mental image of it is appearing to be emptiness. Make sense? Okay, Roanna, what do you think?
It makes sense.
Okay.
I don't want to cop out. It makes sense because the mental image is the mental image.
Right.
And you
And
know it's a mental image.
A mental image is a conventional truth. It appears to be inherently existent. All
That's an
conventional
emotional response.
Sorry,
I see
yeah,
that
what?
as an emotional response. You're grasping at I, so you want the idea to be inherently existent that you're thinking about. But basically, it isn't going to make it any more inherent, you know?
Okay. So I remember once in the Lan Rim Center in England. Where is that place in England? Dumfries?
Leeds?
No, Dumfries. What is that? There's one part on the west coast of England. Anyway, the Lama was teaching, and he said that when you have, even if you have a conceptual realization of emptiness, so conceptual realization of emptiness, okay, that that is not mistaken. And I pointed out this. Not everyone realizes that fact. If you have before you've realized it directly with direct perception, when you have a mental image of emptiness, which is eventually going to disappear when you have the direct realization, that mental image of the emptiness is itself a conventional phenomenon, and it appears to be inherently existent. So there's an example of a yogic direct perceiver can either be mistaken or non-mistaken. So two kinds of mistaken yogic direct perceivers. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That not yogic direct perceiver. The example of mistaken is a yogic direct perceiver realizing impermanence. I was just giving an example also of a conceptual, not a direct perceiver, but an inferential cognition of emptiness still is mistaken. So how about a mental consciousness? So mental consciousnesses we talked about before generally are conceptual, right? What are examples of direct mental consciousnesses? The first instant after you see blue with your eye, there's one instant of mental direct perception of that, which usually goes unattended. But generally, mental consciousness knows things by way of mental image, right? Also, in dream states, and when you're in deep sleep, deep dream state, not just about when you're about to wake up and you're kind of remembering the dream. It's not a direct, it's not the same thing. But when you're in deep sleep, it is said that the appearances to the mind are direct perceptions, even though they're perceiving something that doesn't exist, you know, a dog running at you or something like that. So mental consciousnesses and yogic direct perceivers can be either mistaken or non-mistaken. So we'll come back to mental consciousness in a minute. Right here, the next sentence says there are two types of direct valid cognizers: conceptual direct valid cognizers and non-conceptual direct valid cognizers. How does that hit you? Can you have a conceptual direct valid cognizer? Generally, when we talk about direct valid cognizer, that means without a mental image, right? So what does it mean, conceptual direct valid cognizer? Oh, someone appeared and disappeared a moment ago. Some picture of a nun. She was just checking up on us. Rowena.
Does it mean one that you've received from somebody else that has a really direct, clear mind, like a teacher? Like somebody will. No? Okay.
Yeah, but you can give your example anyway. Like someone is what?
Well, someone that is a highly realized teacher, you join in a perception that's being shared in some way. That is direct.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't happen often, you know. I'm not like saying
I didn't know anyone who could share their perception with me, but maybe.
Some do, I think.
Yeah. Okay. That's nice. It's sort of like darshan, where they actually the Buddha said he cannot transfer his realizations by hand. You know, you think you come to the guru and they say, "Oh, bless me. Now I realize emptiness," or something like that.
Well, I think somebody like Choate Rinpoche could do that.
You think so? Okay.
That was just an experience. Now, I could have been imputing all kinds of things, except there was no activity in my mind that was developing from its own side. That's one reason.
Yeah, that's still, it's not transfer, it's maybe creating the correct cooperative conditions for you to make some
Okay, well, that's good to get clarification.
Blessing, yeah, but they don't transfer it to your mind.
Okay. No, but they're not going with hands-on. It's not a hands-on procedure.
Right, and they don't sort of send it out as a laser beam to you.
No, it was just, it was like suddenly being someplace else in a different version of my mind stopped. My generalities were quiet. Whatever he was doing was very present.
Okay, so that usually that's what's called darshan. You know, darshan means kind of like seeing, you know, being in the presence of someone, and opening up your mind to the possibility of great love. Who is it? Great Vedic Hindu Ma, the great mother, Amma.
Amma, yeah.
They would sit in her presence, and your heart would open or something like that. It's not as though they're transferring the realization to you, but some kind of cooperative condition.
Okay.
People often go to lamas for darshan. I can't remember what we say in Tibetan. That's more of a Sanskrit, sort of Indian kind of thing. So here, conceptual, direct, valid cognizers. What does that mean? From a Prasangika point of view, when you have understood something by means of a mental image, subsequent moments of that are categorized as direct or evident. Let me read you a little bit from this Tenets text that Geshe Zopa and Jeffrey Hopkins translated together.
What page is that?
Okay, I'll get you the page in a second here. I don't even find anything. So we're talking about conceptual valid cognizers, right? Yeah. So let me read some. On page 310, all subsequent cognitions are necessarily direct valid cognitions. Prasangika. So earlier when we talked about Sautrantika and others, subsequent cognitions could be either subsequent cognition of I consciousness would be a subsequent direct cognition, right? The first instant is valid. The subsequent cognitions are no longer valid, but they realize the object, right? I consciousness. Mental cognition, if you have a inferential cognition, the second instant of that is no longer called an inferential cognition, right? Why not? Because an inferential cognition has to rely upon a realization that's relying upon a reason. The subsequent moments of that no longer are called subsequent cognitions, are no longer called inferential cognizers. They're subsequent cognitions. We following? Bob only nods a little bit. No one else is nodding. Nadine, you following what I'm saying? So for Prasangika, all subsequent cognitions are necessarily direct valid cognizers. So first of all, surprising that they're valid because they no longer have to be fresh, but they're direct. They're not, say, even a conceptual consciousness like we're talking about here. For the second moment of an inferring consciousness that realizes sound is impermanent is a conceptual, direct, valid cognition. So the first moment is not called direct, it's conceptual. It depends upon the reason. But then the second moment, there is a remembering consciousness of that, which is, again, conceptual. But as it no longer depends upon the reason, it's said to be a direct realization. So it is a conceptual, direct, valid cognition. What do we say? Conceptual, direct, valid cognizers, right? You follow? Bob, do you follow? You've read, Bob always reads all of these things. Stephen, what do you think? You just appeared again out of the...
Yeah, I'm following. Thank you for calling on me, Venerable George. I'm following on the mental side, and that seems for me to kind of patch a hole with other schools that only accept the initial cognition. But it made me immediately wonder about sense consciousnesses and their subsequent moments. Can they also be valid direct cognitions using the same?
Well, yeah, they're still, from Prasangika point of view, the subsequent moments of the sense are still valid, because they don't take the word valid to mean prime in the sense of being fresh, like we say prime steak, prime rib, or something like that. Or, and this is, you know, what's the Amazon Prime or something like that? You know, it doesn't have to be fresh. They say the pramana means it gets to the main, it realizes the main object. But the subtle thing here, Bob, yeah.
I mean, for me, it's sort of a funny way of looking at things, because here, whether something is direct or non-direct, it just depends on whether it's using a reason or not. So if it's using a reason, then it is not direct. If it is not relying on a reason, then it is direct. And sense perception is direct because it doesn't rely on a reason or a concept. But I'm trying to think.
It doesn't have to be a reason. Say, for instance, if you have a realization of emptiness, even a conceptual realization of emptiness, you're a long way from realizing emptiness directly with a direct perceiver. You have a memory, you remember it, but you've realized emptiness. You've gotten at the object, which is incredible, you know, even if it's not a direct realization. What was, you know, if you have a realization with direct perceiver of emptiness, that's when you can start to abandon the obstructions to liberation, right? The klesha, you have certain abandonments so that they will never come back. We call analytical cessation, right? You have cessation of certain delusions. When you have an intellectual understanding of something, like emptiness, let's say even a realization of that, you realized emptiness with conception, that in no way can abandon any delusion so that they'll never come back again. It can cause them to subdue, was the word, diminish, and almost be non-manifest for that time. When you have a conceptual realization, I'll call it in a minute, Stephen. When you have a conceptual realization of emptiness, in that meditative session, say if you have a union of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight, no delusions will manifest. They are unmanifest at that time. But when you rise from that, they haven't been abandoned. They can come back. If you have a direct realization of emptiness with a direct perceiver, you can cause some of the delusions to be ceased. Certain ones of them at various points will be ceased, so they'll never come back again. That can't happen with a conceptual realization of it. However, that conceptual understanding, that realization, when you remember it later, that is called a conceptual direct valid cognizer, a remembering consciousness. So you have to search through the text to find explicit statements about it, but in general, the Prasangika, especially as explained by Lama Tsongkhapa, this is a very special point. So for instance, when I mentioned to you at the beginning of our meditation on the clear light nature of the mind, I said, if you have a remembering consciousness of what you had before, even if it was not a direct realization of your clear light nature, even if it was conceptual, but something that is still have a mental image of the clear light nature of the mind, but you've it may not be a actual realization, but even the remembering consciousness of that can be brought up. It's almost like getting back to that same state without relying on your meditation before. So it's very useful to understand. Lama Zopa Rinpoche mentions sometimes when you're practicing on the Vajrayana, it's very important to keep a continuity of the realizations that you've made. Like you take the 4 initiations of 4 empowerments and so forth, and experience the various levels of even an imagination of bliss and emptiness. If you have a remembering consciousness of that, that's almost like having the same experience again. So it's very, very important that we try to keep a continuity of those things. Now, both of you wanted to make some comments, Stephen and Bob, but Stephen, you're unmuted first, so you get first chance.
Oh, thank you. I was thinking about the acquired afflictive obscurations. So what you're saying is that a conceptual consciousness cannot uproot an arbitrary acquired afflictive obscuration. Say, well, I didn't believe in emptiness, but then I realized it conceptually.
Yeah.
Would that qualify as getting rid of that obscuration? Go ahead, please.
Acquired, when we talk about acquired or innate afflictions. So the acquired or intellectually, what do they call it? Intellectually acquired afflictions are not categorized as actual obstructions to liberation. They can be, you can have them again later. Even if you overcome them now, you can have them, you can, due to listening to wrong teachings or thinking in the wrong way in the future, you can acquire them again. But when we're talking about innate ones, that means since beginningless time, we've had imprints of them within our mind stream. I'm not sure I answered what you're asking exactly, but let me give Bob a chance, and then you can come back in a second. Bob, you had some other comment to make also?
Well, I was just going to come back to this other one, that in the Cutting Through Appearances book, when he talks about the how a direct perception can be conceptual in the Prasangika method, he says here,
a direct perception can be conceptual. You mean a conception can be a direct perception?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So conception can be direct. And he says here that direct here means not relying on a logical sign. It does not mean that the consciousness is non-conceptual. So it is this funny notion of direct being, I mean, normally when we think of, for example, a seeing as being a direct perception, to us, it normally, in ordinary English, it would mean just being manifest, direct, we directly see it. But here it has a funny notion of direct meaning not depending on a reason. So it's a different meaning of direct.
In some cases, not depending on a reason, but also if you've realized emptiness directly, and then you rise from that meditative equipoise, later you remember that, that's not depending, not that the first one was depending on a reason, you had a direct realization. Now that also is called a conceptual remembering consciousness of emptiness is called a direct perception. And because it's a memory consciousness, it's necessarily conceptual. Okay, so it doesn't have, it's not only that it depends, it's not only in the case of remembering an inference or the second moment of an inference, but even in the case of a direct perception before that you remember later, that's also called a direct realization. Yeah.
But when you're remembering, you're also not relying on a reason. So it fits also in that case as well. Because
right.
a memory doesn't depend upon a reason. So if you use this definition of direct, meaning not relying on a reason, it makes sense that a memory would be a direct realization.
Does it say that here?
Yeah, it's on the bottom of page 312, almost the very last sentence. Direct here means not relying on a logical sign. So even a memory does not rely on a logical sign.
When you say here, it's the paragraph, if you go up about a third.
Well, yeah, but I,
Here means the same holds true for an inferential cognition, consciousness. So
it means
here
the
is
second moment of
inferential cognition. So, you know, you could say that but generally it doesn't have to depend. What you were depending on here is not if you have a remembering consciousness of a direct perception, remembering consciousness of that is necessarily a conceptual mind. I remember seeing blue. I remember seeing the Dalai Lama or something like that. That memory, remembering consciousness, although it's conceptual, is called a direct perception. Not in that case, you wouldn't necessarily say because it doesn't depend on a reason, but it is. What did we say here earlier?
Venerable George, maybe the easiest thing, can you define what you mean by direct? So because
okay, what I mean by direct is hopefully what I have been taught by the Lamas. It's not my own personal view. Okay, so when we talk about direct, the word that we find in Tibetan is ngunsum. Ngunsum is sounds strange. Sum doesn't mean three. Ngunsum just means direct. Generally, that means when we say a miki ngunsum, mik means I. That means an I direct perceiver. But the word ngunsum is a Tibetan translation of the Sanskrit prataksha. Prataksha, that's a nice word to learn. Prataksha, all of the lower tenets say that ngunsum direct or prataksha means a consciousness. For Prasangika, direct actually it mainly refers to the object. Another way we could say is evident, an evident object. What do we call it? What's the other word? Ngongyur. Ngongyur is another word that we often talk about when we talk about the three kinds of phenomena: manifest, hidden, and deeply hidden. Remember us talking about that? So manifest objects are the Tibetan word is ngongyur, manifest. Ngongyur and ngunsum, or prataksha, actually are synonyms. So for Prasangika, manifest or evident mainly, or ngunsum, direct, mainly refers to the object, and indirectly it refers to the consciousness that's knowing that, in the same way that you say a grass fire or a log fire. You know, you're mainly talking about the object, and indirectly you're talking about a consciousness that's knowing that. Okay, so that's what, when we say here, what was the word that you were saying before? Direct. So that direct mainly means this word prataksha. So generally in all the lower schools, prataksha mainly means the mind that's knowing something. So it's knowing it directly. But from the Prasangika point of view, prataksha refers to the object which is evident or obvious or manifest, right? It doesn't need any kind of logic. It's just there. I like evident. I've been trying to retranslate some of my sadhanas, and you know, that is more evocative to me. So, well, let me just continue a little bit here. We'll come, and if you have a question. So illustrations of conceptual direct valid cognizers are, for example, the second moment of an inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent, right? Second moment, for the reason that Bob was saying, it no longer depends upon a reason. So it is now called a direct, a conceptual direct valid cognizer. And a remembering consciousness that is factually concordant memory of blue generated through being induced by a sense direct perceiver apprehending blue. Wow, if I had said that sentence to you last month when we were just beginning, you would have gone, give me a break. Can you kind of follow that now? A remembering consciousness, that's going to be a mental consciousness that remembers, that is a factually concordant memory. That means it does remember correctly. Memory of blue generated through being induced by a sense direct perceiver apprehending blue. So first you apprehended blue with your eye consciousness. Later, someone says, what color was that mug? You say you remember it was blue. So that is said to be a conceptual direct perceiver, a direct valid perceiver. Well, is it here? We're leaving off the word valid. Factually concordant of blue generated through illustrations of a correct valid cognizers, right? Valid cognizers. So they don't have to be fresh as the other schools. And the fact that they're direct doesn't preclude them being conceptual. They could be conceptual. Bob.
So just to, my trying to make sense of what you've just been saying, what you seem to say is that in the Prasangika, that if you are directly perceiving a mental image, that in the Prasangika, that can be considered direct, because you have a manifest image that you are in contact with. So your conceptual consciousness can be direct in that sense, that it's in direct contact with the generic image that that's appearing to it.
Not so much that. So there's two different things here. Prataksha, which means evident, which we've often added the word perceiver on before, like direct perceiver, eye direct perceiver. It's actually, was it chaksha prataksha? Chaksha, I think, means my eye, and eye direct perceiver. That's just from Prasangika. You can still use that terminology, but it's kind of like giving the name of the cause to the effect. The effect is the eye consciousness. The cause is the actual prataksha, is the actual evident object, the blue or whatever. Okay, so there's a difference here when we talk about prataksha, direct or evident, or direct perceiver, and realizing with direct perception. That's different. Actually, we mentioned it a little bit in Sautrantika. You have a direct perception. Say you realize the emptiness of the person. You have a direct perception of the aggregates, which themselves are impermanent, and therefore suitable to appear to a direct perception. And there you indirectly realize the selflessness. You implicitly understand it, right? Because it doesn't, for them, selflessness is being permanent, does not appear to that direct perceiver. Direct perceivers for Sautrantika only perceive things which are impermanent. So here, when we talk about having a direct conceptual realization of something, it doesn't mean that you're realizing it with the direct perceiver. Direct perceiver means no longer conceptual. So there's two words. We say ngonsum du, that means with, by means of direct perception. or we say directly. Go on, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting off track here a little bit. I didn't mean to say perception. I probably should have said direct cognizer.
Okay. Or direct perceiver, yeah.
And so it's not that you have a direct sense perception, but whether a mental consciousness can be a direct cognizer because it is directly cognizing the mental image.
It's not directly cognizing the mental image. The mental image appears a little bit more complicated. Maybe you're worried about we're going off track. It's said that we comprehend the mental image, but what we are actually realizing is what the mental image is of. You know, like if it's a mental image of blue or a mental image of emptiness, that is our actual engaged object, the emptiness. Generally, the appearing object, that's why we say conception is mistaken, because we mistake the mental image for the actual object that we're engaging with, that we're trying to understand conceptually. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, what I was trying to understand is why a memory, why you know, a memory is considered a direct mental cognition.
So here, another way of approaching it is to leave off the word direct. Say that kind of confuses the issue. Say evident. It is an evident valid cognizer, because it is something which is evident to you now. So you're calling the consciousness by the name of the object because it no longer you know, depends on some kind of reasoning or logic or something like that. Okay, subtle points. If we have a class, and apparently we'll have class next week, we can think about it, do some reading, and we can come back to this. It's very, these are amongst the unique tenets of the Prasangika, but you know, so it's not easy to understand. Okay, so next thing, an illustration of a non-conceptual direct valid cognizer. That's easy, right? Non-conceptual direct valid cognizer is, for example, a sense direct perceiver or a sense prataksha. You know, we call it direct because the object is evident. A sense evident perception is a sense direct perceiver apprehending a form. You see blue, or you hear a sound, or you taste something. Those are all called form. When we say apprehending a form, here the word form means object of the five senses. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean visual form. Okay. If it is a direct valid cognizer, it is not necessarily a perceptible object. Well, this is just what we're talking about. Here, the word perceptible object is ngunsum. That means rather than perceptual object, you're adding more, in adding an extra word, object. It is not necessarily evident. If it is a direct valid cognizer, it is not necessarily evident or a perceptible object, because if it is a yogic direct perceiver, it is necessarily not a perceptible object. It is not necessarily evident. This is so because perceptual object, or evident, and manifest object are equivalent. Remember, I mentioned to you before these two things. When we talk about the three kinds of phenomena, manifest, hidden, and deeply hidden, manifest means things that you don't need to use a logical reason to perceive. They are evident to you. They are perceptible. So they say they're manifest. They're manifest. that manifest also means prataksha. Manifest is one word. Evident or perceptible object is a synonym of that. Manifest and the evident are synonymous. Let's go on. Yeah, there's not much more. Do we have time? We might just get through this and then we can go over a little finer next time. On page 27, if it is a subsequent cognizer, it is necessarily a direct valid cognizer. Oh, okay. Subsequent cognizer before could be conceptual or non-conceptual in the lower schools. Here, it's necessarily a direct cognizer. And it's a subsequent cognizer can also be valid. Remember the lower school, there's two things here. We're talking about direct and valid, things that the other schools would not say. For the lower schools, if it's a subsequent cognizer, it is not necessarily direct, although it could be a subsequent cognizer of the I consciousness, but a subsequent mental cognizer is not direct for the lower schools. Here it is direct. And it is necessarily, for Prasangika, it's necessarily valid. Because what does a subsequent cognizer mean? It means realizing that which was already realized. So already implicit in the statement is that a subsequent cognizer, you don't just talk about a subsequent cognizer of a wrong consciousness. That's not called a subsequent cognizer. Subsequent cognizer has to realize its object. So from Prasangika point of view, that makes it valid. It doesn't have to be the first instant only. Okay? I'm going to be like Jeremy here, the thinker. Did you ever see the Rodin, the statue, the thinker? I lived in Philadelphia. Yeah, maybe that's where I lived in Philadelphia for some time on Green Street, just parallel to the street where the art museum was on. And the Rodin Museum was just down the street from me. I used to spend a lot of time looking at the gates of hell and the replication. I think it was made by Rodin. It wasn't maybe the first one, but there was a thinker there. So if it is a subsequent cognizer, it is necessarily a direct valid cognizer. There are 4 types of inferential cognizers. Remember, we talked about this before. Inferential cognizers by the power of the fact. You know, when you use a logical reason. Inferential cognizers through renown, like remembering, by understanding that the bearer of the rabbit is suitable to be called moon and so forth. Inferential cognizers through an example, I think that we'll mention here, and inferential cognizers through belief. Inferential cognizers through belief were inferential cognizers that allowed you to realize deeply hidden phenomena, not just hidden phenomena like emptiness, but deeply hidden phenomena like why this particular act of giving would ripen in a particular result, not just in something good, but when it will ripen, to whom, in what realm, and at what time, and so forth. That you can know through the Buddha's proclamation, when the Buddha explained, by giving this, you will be born as a Pratika Buddha in the future with this name and that universe, having realized already that the Buddha is a valid person. More of this will come if we get a chance to study, if you get a chance to study Tariq, Signs and Reasonings. So continuing, inferential cognizer through renown and inferential cognizer through an example are included in inferential cognizer by the power of the fact. Then, sort of two more subtle paragraphs here. If it is a valid cognizer, it is not necessarily non-mistaken with respect to its determined object. It is not necessarily non-mistaken with respect to its determined object. So before, when we talked about valid cognizer, generally it had to be non-mistaken in the lower tenets. Mistaken means mistaking the appearing object. If it is a valid cognizer, it is not necessarily non-mistaken. It is not necessarily non-mistaken with respect to its determined object. Because an inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent is a consciousness that is mistaken with respect to impermanent sound. What does that mean? Sound is impermanent, but it is mistaken with respect to that because it appears to be inherently existing. Okay. If it is a conscious, next paragraph, if it is a consciousness, it necessarily realizes its object of comprehension. So this is one that we haven't talked about before, object of comprehension. Remember I said the mental image is the appearing object, and for that conception, the mental image is not its engaged object or determined object. Let's say if you have the appearance of Clinton's face, I don't know, I'm thinking of Clinton. I used to use that as an example many years ago when he was president. If you have an appearance of Clinton's face, that's the appearing object, the mental image, and the engaged object and the determined object is actual Clinton's face. Okay, but here it says if it is a consciousness, it necessarily realizes its object of comprehension. Okay, we haven't talked about object of comprehension before, I think, because the generic image, mental image, meaning generality, of the horns of a rabbit is the object of comprehension of a conception apprehending the horns of a rabbit. So here, we're talking about conception here, the object of comprehension is synonymous with the appearing object. Okay, so let's put it that way. If it is a consciousness, it necessarily realizes its appearing object, because the meaning generality, the mental image of the horns of a rabbit. Okay, so you think you've seen the rabbit's ears and you had a misconception, horns of a rabbit. So what is appearing to your mind is a mental image of the horns of a rabbit. Are there when you have that thought, is there actually a determined object, a conceived object? No, the horns of a rabbit don't exist, but something is definitely appearing to you, right? The object of comprehension of a conception apprehending the horns of a rabbit, or in other words, the appearing object of a conception apprehending the horns of a rabbit, and the generic image, it is consciousness necessarily realizes it because the generic image of the horns of a rabbit is the object of comprehension of a conception apprehending the horns of a rabbit. So it is, you are comprehending or having the appearance of the horns of a rabbit. They definitely appear to you, even though the object that you're thinking about doesn't exist. This is all under the thing. No, that's not under that previous category. If it is a consciousness, it necessarily realizes its object of comprehension. So you don't realize the horns of a rabbit, but you necessarily you necessarily comprehend and having appearing to you the horns of a rabbit. And the generic image of permanent sound, okay, you have a misconception. You're thinking about sound to be permanent. Maybe you're mistaking it with being eternal or something, like in the Vedic sense. They say the Vedas are eternal sound or something like that. So some people take that to mean permanent. If you have the generic image, the mental image of sound being impermanent, sound being permanent, that mental image is the object of comprehension of a conception apprehending sound to be permanent. It's in other words, it's the appearing object of the conception apprehending sound to be impermanent. That conception is wrong. There's no conceived object, permanent sound, but there is definitely an appearing object, which is called its object of comprehension. Okay. Then, ways of asserting selflessness. Will we get through this? We won't get through this. A person's emptiness of being self-sufficient, substantially existent, is asserted to be the coarse selflessness of persons, whereas in the lower tenets, that's considered to be the subtle selflessness of persons, right? And the person's emptiness of being truly existent or true establishment is asserted to be the subtle selflessness of persons. You could say it from the Prasangika point of view, the emptiness of true existence and the emptiness of inherent existence are synonymous. Let me ask you a question. Is true existence and inherent existence, are they synonymous? Bob nods, yes. Everyone else is hedging their bets. Roena, are they synonymous? True existence, for Prasangika, true existence and inherent existence?
I think the way you were doing, yes, at this point, but then when Rinpoche says real, there comes out something else again. When Rinpoche says is the real I, you come up with something a little different.
Yeah, real probably means true there, yeah, the true I. So from Prasangika point of view, they are not synonyms.
Yeah.
Okay, why are they not synonyms? Because they don't exist. To be synonyms, two things have to exist. So what are synonyms are the emptiness of inherent existence and the emptiness of true existence. Those would be synonyms because they both exist. Okay, so it's just a subtle thing. They call, what do they call it? Similes or similitudes of synonyms, true existence and inherent existence. So there's a whole list of things for Prasangika that are all theoretical synonyms. Their emptinesses are synonyms. Okay, the emptiness of a gross object composed of partless particles. From Prasangika point of view, that doesn't exist, right? The emptiness of a gross object composed of partless particles. Why doesn't it exist? Because no particles are partless. Everything has even the smallest particle has a north side and a south side and an east side and a west side, top side, bottom side. So it has parts. There's no partless particles. And the valid cognizer, so it says the emptiness of a gross object composed of partless particles is posited as a coarse selflessness of phenomena. I've never seen that anywhere else. This must be Jason Truckee Gelson's kind of cause to bring in some doubts. Generally, we say the subtle selflessness of phenomena is a phenomena being empty of inherent existence. Usually we don't talk about the gross selflessness of phenomena. We do talk about the gross selflessness of persons, but here he's saying the emptiness of a gross object composed of partless particles, that's one example of the gross selflessness of phenomena, and the valid cognizer apprehending it being different substances is also posited as a coarse selflessness of phenomena. What is that? valid cognizer apprehending it being different substances. I'm not sure I understand what he's saying there. It, the emptiness of a gross object composed of partless particles, and the valid cognizer apprehending it being different substances. Okay, so it's a little bit like the Chittamatra view of subject and object being of one substance. The emptiness of true establishment or true existence of the aggregates, the basis of designation, is posited as the subtle selflessness of phenomena. So what it's getting at there is when we talk about, like in the Heart Sutra, Shariputra, when Avalokiteshvara, Arya Avalokiteshvara is explaining the Shariputra, how the Bodhisattvas practice the perfection of wisdom. He said that they meditate on the emptiness of the 5 aggregates also. Do you remember that phrase from the Heart Sutra? Also. So that what's implied there, although generally in the Hinayana point of view, you talk about the selflessness of the person, you talk about the person being empty of being self-supporting, substantially existent. That gets you out, that gets you to nirvana, according to them. From the Prasangika point of view, even the Hinayana arhats have realized the emptiness of the person, of being inherently existent. There's no way to achieve liberation from the Prasangika point of view without realizing the subtle selflessness of persons, the person being empty of inherent existence. So the play in the Heart Sutra is that you don't meditate just on the person, the emptiness of the person, whether it be the self-supporting substantially existence or inherent existence. You meditate on also the emptiness of all phenomena, which can be, an example here is given the 5 aggregates also. So even the basis of designation of the person, the 5 aggregates, they are also empty of inherent existence. Not just the person is empty of inherent existence. So I'm going to stop there. We just have a little bit more to go on that, and maybe we'll continue next time also going over some of these other subtle points. Before I finish, give you a chance to ask some other question. Anything else that you want to ask or point out? Yeah, Nadine.
Please forgive me if I'm wrong, but I keep thinking that we did not finish last time point number 4 about objects, about conventional and ultimate truth.
Oh, you're probably right. Okay, so where did we get? So I can make a note to continue to go over that again next time. Where did we finish?
I'm not sure, but it's about conventional truth and ultimate truth, and I keep thinking I did not listen.
Oh, okay. So right there, the definition of ultimate truth on page 26 of Svensson. I'm not sure what in Sandy Kondo's. Yeah, okay. So yeah, that will fit in nicely. We could say for ordinary beings, the definition of an ultimate truth is an object found by a valid cognizer analyzing the ultimate. We could say that for an ordinary being, but that would not include the consciousness of a Buddha, because the consciousness of the Buddha realizes both conventional truths and ultimate truths simultaneously. So if you just said, an ultimate truth is an object found by a valid cognizer analyzing the ultimate, a Buddhist consciousness analyzing the ultimate also realizes conventional things. So it wouldn't apply to a Buddha. So there's the additional phrase here. The definition of an ultimate truth is an object found by a valid cognizer analyzing the ultimate, and with respect to which that valid cognizer analyzing the ultimate becomes a valid cognizer analyzing the ultimate. So a little bit, those extra phrases, other than the first part of the sentence, the definition of an ultimate truth is an object found by a valid cognizer analyzing the ultimate. That could be suffice for ordinary beings. Generally, that's the case. But in order to include the consciousness of a Buddha, you have to add those other phrases at the end. Same thing for conventional truth. I guess maybe did we talk about conventional truth? Also, yeah, I guess maybe I have to go over that next time also. The definition on page 25, the definition of a conventional truth is an object that is found by a valid cognizer analyzing a conventionality. That would suffice for ordinary beings. And with respect to which that valid cognizer analyzing the conventionality becomes a valid cognizer analyzing conventionality, it's necessary to include the consciousness of a Buddha. So basically what it means is that Buddhist consciousness, one consciousness realizes conventionalities, conventional truths, and ultimate truths at the same time. We have imprints in our mind that preclude that. Those are amongst the objects, what do we call it? The obstructions to omniscience. Okay, only when you become an omniscient being, a Buddha, can you perceive both levels of truth at the same time. Otherwise, you have to alternate between the two. You might have you might see conventionalities and have a remembering consciousness of emptiness, but not a direct realization of emptiness. When you're in direct realization of emptiness, say Arya Bodhisattvas, conventionalities do not appear to you. So only the Buddha perceives both at the same time. But we still talk about from the perspective of conventionalities. Let's say in Tantra also, when you meditate on yourself as a deity, you try to do an analysis that what is appearing to you is actually empty of inherent existence. So you might, try to apply, in that case, try to have a similitude of a simultaneous realization. The deity is appearing, yourself as the deity is appearing, but that appearance is empty of inherent existence. You try to, practice or emulate or what's the word? When you have a stage production, what is it called? When you have try to rehearse that. Only the Buddha perceives both levels of truth at the same time. So those extra sentences are added, but we'll go over that again in a little more detail next time. Anyone else have another question? Bob, did you have a? No. Stephen? David is still there in the form of a stupa. Okay, so let's do a little dedication. Try to relax your body and mind and bring back a remembering consciousness of the clear light nature of your mind. Focus on that. Let go of all other thoughts. And then within that clarity, recall that we've created some virtuous karma. We've created merit today by means of having first made a motivation at the beginning. So even if we forgot that motivation, the activity of participating created some virtue. And also during the session, using our wisdom and compassion, we've created virtuous karma. Make a firm determination that we are wishing, determining, dedicating these merits that they may bring about the great enlightenment of all sentient beings. What does that mean? It means that we become enlightened, and through that means we work to bring about the enlightenment of all sentient beings. So sentient beings means those that are not yet enlightened, that have minds that still have delusions. Sentient here doesn't mean the Buddha is a sentient being. So that we can't make them become enlightened. They're already enlightened. Due to these merits, may I quickly become a Buddha and set each and every sentient being effortlessly into that very same state due to these merits. That's our end goal. Due to these merits, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not decline, not diminish, but increase more and more. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, the source of every single benefit and happiness in the world, the incomparable Tenzin Gyatso, may your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, Buddha Shakyamuni's moral way, morality, who serves as a bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Savior of myself and others, your disciples, I beseech you, please, please live long. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, all the Buddhas of the past, for all those wandering in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please live long. Please, please live long. And just a reminder, tomorrow evening, is it 5 to 6:30? We'll have prayers, Tara praises dedicated especially for the well-being of Geshe Sherab. And I will be here to participate. I'm not sure if I actually recite you, maybe we do together or someone else will say. And when you do pujas like that, when you do prayers like that, you don't think only of Geshe Sherab. You think, generally you think of all sentient beings. Whenever you make, you pray for your aunt or your uncle or your brother or even yourself, you don't think may the suffering only be eliminated for them alone, but they're just an example of all sentient beings you use as your focus. So we'll do those prayers. Apparently Geshe is getting progressively better. I haven't heard an update in the last day or two, but he's at Kopan and has a single room, and he's taking medication, especially for his lungs, I think. So thank you very much. Thanks for bearing with us. The 12, Intrepid 12, there was a 13th who's left. And maybe some people will see this on YouTube. And so there might be a bit more. Take care. See you next week.